He was dating the daughter, but couldn't resist the mother. What started as a hidden affair turned into a medical nightmare, then ended with blood on the fireplace floor. 2 women, 1 man, and a secret that destroyed everything. Atlanta, Georgia, summer 2022. Trayvon Miller wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to stir up a scandal. At 27, he had built a solid reputation as a personal trainer at one of Atlanta's upscale gyms. Charismatic, charming, and ridiculously fit, he had that rare quality of making everyone in the room feel like they mattered. Clients trusted him, women admired him, and to most people, he looked like someone who had his life together. But as it turns out, appearances can be painfully deceiving. That summer, Trayvon met Kendra Wallace, a 21-year-old psychology major who had just transferred to Georgia State University. Kendra was bright, ambitious, and maybe a little too trusting for her own good. She had that kind of quiet beauty that didn't scream for attention, but somehow drew people in any way. They met at the gym, of course. Kendra had come in with a friend, looking to get in shape and maybe shed the last bits of her teenage insecurities. Trayvon was assigned as her trainer. From day one, there was chemistry. The way he adjusted her posture, the little compliments, the casual texts that turned into late-night conversations. Within a few weeks, they were seeing each other outside of the gym. By August, they were officially dating. What Kendra didn't know, what no one knew, was how complicated things would get once Trayvon was introduced to her family. Monique was Kendra's mother, 46, a powerhouse in Atlanta's real estate scene. Polished, poised, and absolutely no nonsense. She had raised Kendra alone since the girl was 7, after a messy divorce that left Monique wary of love, but fiercely protective of her daughter. Monique was the kind of woman who made an impression. Long legs, sharp suits, and eyes that seemed to see straight through people. She wasn't cruel, just careful with her heart, her words, and especially the people she allowed in her life. When Kendra brought Trayvon home for dinner, Monique greeted him with polite warmth. She was skeptical at first. What mother wouldn't be? But Trayvon knew how to charm his way into favor. He complimented Monique's cooking, asked thoughtful questions about her career, and offered to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen the following weekend. He was the perfect guest. Too perfect. Over the next few weeks, Trayvon started spending more time at the Wallace home. Kendra, busy with school and a part-time job, often left Trayvon alone at the house waiting for her. Sometimes Monique would be there. Sometimes they'd talk. Just small things at first, fitness, real estate, politics, music. But something shifted. Monique began to notice little things. The way Trayvon looked at her just a second too long. The way his jokes felt slightly suggestive, the subtle change in tone when Kendra wasn't around. She told herself she was imagining it, that he was just friendly, that she was being ridiculous. But the truth was, Monique hadn't felt desired in years. She was successful, yes, but she was also lonely. The kind of loneliness that creeps in when the house is quiet, when your phone doesn't ring, and when the only person who really talks to you anymore is your adult child. And Trayvon, young, magnetic, and attentive, had unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, triggered something she thought was long gone. Kendra didn't suspect a thing. She was happy. She told friends that Trayvon was different, more mature, grounded. She even daydreamed about introducing him to her father one day, showing him that not all men disappointed. But Trayvon, he was playing with fire, whether he knew it or not. He was inching closer and closer to something he wouldn't be able to undo. By early September, all 3 of them, Trayvon, Kendra, and Monique, were entangled in a silent triangle. No one had crossed the line yet, not officially. But the tension was there, palpable. And when something simmers for too long, it eventually boils over. None of them could have predicted how far things would spiral. But some would end up dead. It started with harmless things. A casual cup of coffee while Kendra was still in class. A lighthearted text from Trayvon to Monique asking for advice about a condo he was thinking of buying. A laugh shared in the kitchen over something on the news. Moments that felt innocent on the surface, but underneath there was a shift. An undertow pulling two people toward a place they should never go. Monique kept telling herself it was nothing. She wasn't that kind of woman. And Trayvon, he was just being polite, friendly, attentive. That's how he was with everyone, right? But then came a night, it almost stopped being harmless. Kendra had a late shift at work. Monique had made a simple dinner, not expecting company. But when Trayvon showed up unexpectedly with a bottle of red wine, smiling like he belonged there, Monique didn't turn him away. They ate together, talked about everything from politics to parenting. Monique laughed more that evening than she had in months. At one point, Trayvon reached across the table to take her empty wine glass. Their fingers brushed. It lasted only a second, but something electric passed between them. Both of them felt it. Neither of them acknowledged it. When Kendra walked in an hour later, exhausted and unaware, she found them watching an old movie on the couch. Not close, not inappropriate, but different. She didn't think much of it, but Monique did. She barely slept that night. What followed was a slow, emotional erosion of boundaries. Trayvon began texting Monique more often. Not about anything explicit. He asked about her day, sent her jokes, even a picture of sunset once with the caption, "Thought you'd like this." She didn't reply right away, but she saved the photo. Monique hated herself for how she waited for his messages. Hated how she started changing outfits before coming downstairs, just in case he dropped by. Hated the flutter in her chest whenever his name lit up her screen. She knew it was wrong. But loneliness has a way of blurring right and wrong when it's been fed for too long. And Trayvon, whether he intended to or not, he fed into it. He didn't stop when Monique complimented his shirt. He didn't pull away when she touched his arm while laughing. He didn't set boundaries. If anything, he invited the tension. Maybe he liked the attention. Maybe he liked the control. The moment that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Kendra had gone out of town for a weekend conference. Trayvon stopped by the Wallace house, claiming he forgot his gym bag. Monique, dressed down in a robe and slippers, opened the door surprised to see him, but didn't hesitate to let him in. They talked, laughed. The power flickered due to a storm. Trayvon offered to check the circuit breaker. By the time the power came back, the two of them were sitting in the dimly lit living room, closer than they should have been. Monique said something about always being the strong one, always being the adult, and how exhausting it was. Trayvon looked at her for a long second and said quietly, "You don't always have to be." Monique blinked, and in that moment, she leaned forward just slightly. Trayvon didn't move away. They didn't kiss, but they didn't need to. Something passed between them, heavy, real, dangerous. And when Monique finally stood up, her hands shaking, she simply said, "You should go." And he did, but it was already too late. Over the next few days, Monique avoided both Kendra and Trayvon. She canceled dinners, ignored texts, buried herself in work. Kendra noticed something was off. "Is everything okay with you and Trey?" she asked one night. Monique forced a smile. Of course. Why wouldn't it be? But Kendra felt it. The subtle shift. The coolness in Trayvon's tone. The occasional distracted look in Monique's eyes. Something had changed, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. As for Trayvon, he started acting differently too. Less present. Less affectionate. He pulled away from Kendra without explanation. And when she asked, he always had some excuse. Tired, busy, stressed. He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the truth either. By mid-October, the three of them were entangled in something that felt like a web spun too tight. Monique was battling guilt. She hated what had almost happened, hated herself for not stopping it sooner, but also hated the way she missed him. Kendra was confused. Her relationship with Trayvon, once exciting and promising, now felt distant and hollow. And Trayvon was unraveling. He hadn't been to a doctor in years, never took his health seriously. He brushed off fatigue, occasional night sweats, weight loss. He thought he was just overworked. He didn't know what was really happening inside his body. None of them did. But everything was about to change. It started with a headache. Kendra had always been healthy. She ate well, exercised, went to regular checkups. But now, in late October, she couldn't shake the constant fatigue. Her body felt heavy, her appetite was gone, and the headaches came in waves, thick, pounding pulses that blurred her vision. She chalked it up to stress, midterms, relationship trouble, maybe even burnout. But then came the fever, low grade at first, then higher. Her joints ached. She lost 7 pounds in 10 days. Something wasn't right. She didn't tell Trayvon. They'd barely been talking. Every time she reached out, he gave her one-word replies. Cold, distant. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew in her gut he wasn't hers anymore. She just didn't know who he was anymore. So she went to the clinic on her own. Routine blood work just to be safe. When a nurse called her 2 days later asking her to come in, she felt that slow panic crawl up her spine. She knew, even before the words left the nurse's mouth. Kendra, you've tested positive for HIV. The world stopped. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her ears were ringing too loud. The room spun. She tried to form a sentence, but her mouth wouldn't work. The nurse handed her a packet of resources. Support groups, treatment options, medication plans. But Kendra didn't hear any of it. All she could think was how, and worse, who else did he hurt? She drove home in silence, hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her phone buzzed. It was her mother. Hey, sweetie, are you coming by the house tonight? I cooked. I need to talk to you, Kendra interrupted. Her voice was dry, flat. Now, when she arrived, Monique was already waiting at the door. One look at her daughter's face, and she knew something had broken. They sat in the kitchen, the air thick with dread. Kendra stared down at the glass of water her mother had placed in front of her, untouched. Then, without ceremony, she said it. I'm HIV positive. Monique blinked. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she whispered, What? I tested positive. I found out this morning. Her voice cracked. I don't even know what to think. Monique reached for her daughter's hand, but Kendra pulled away. I don't want sympathy, she snapped. I want answers. Monique stayed still. Her heart raced. A voice inside her, the one she'd been silencing for weeks, began to scream. Kendra, she said softly. Are you sure it was Trayvon? Kendra let out a bitter laugh. Who else? I've only been with him. He's the only one. The silence that followed was the kind that hums, loud in its quietness, heavy, sharp. And then Monique said the one thing she swore she'd never say. I need to get tested too. That night, Monique didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, retracing every moment, every glance, every text. She hadn't been with anyone else in years. Trayvon was the only one. The next morning, she went to the clinic. She didn't tell Kendra. When her results came back 3 days later, the nurse's face gave it away before she even opened her mouth. Positive. Monique sat frozen in the little white room, her hands folded in her lap. Her world collapsed quietly, like a building brought down from the inside. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, took the papers, and walked out the door. She drove to a park near her office and sat in the car for nearly an hour. Her mind bounced between shame, guilt, and rage. How had she let this happen? How had he done this to both of them? That night, Monique sat across from Kendra at the dining table. I got tested, she said. Kendra looked up slowly, and Monique swallowed hard. Her voice shook. I'm positive too. For a moment, there was only the hum of the refrigerator. Kendra's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Monique looked down. I was with him. Once. I didn't plan for it. It just happened. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Kendra stood up, knocking her chair over. You slept with my boyfriend? Tears welled up in Monique's eyes. I'm sorry. You're sorry. Kendra's voice cracked. You betrayed me. You both did. And now we're both stuck with this for the rest of our lives. Monique couldn't speak. The shame was too thick, the guilt too deep. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Kendra stormed out of the house that night. She didn't answer texts, didn't return calls. For 2 days, Monique didn't know where she was. And then, just as suddenly, Kendra came back. Not with forgiveness, not with understanding, but with a plan. They sat together in the backyard. Kendra's face was calm, but her eyes were fire. I want to see him, she said. Monique looked up. Why? Because he needs to know. He needs to look me in the eye and explain how he did this to us. He doesn't get to walk away like nothing happened. Monique hesitated. And then what? Kendra didn't answer, but the way she stared out into the night said enough. Something inside her had shifted. The naive girl who once dreamed about marrying Trayvon was gone. In her place was a woman wounded by betrayal, by silence, by consequences she didn't ask for. Monique didn't stop her, because a part of her, deep down, wanted the same thing. Closure, or justice, or maybe just a way to make the pain stop. Whatever it was, it would all come to a head at the lake house. It was a cold Saturday afternoon in early November when Trayvon got the text. We need to talk. Just us. Come to the lake house. Tonight. It was from Kendra. At first, he hesitated. He hadn't spoken to her in over a week, and his guilt, though buried under layers of denial, was beginning to claw its way to the surface. He'd been feeling off for weeks. The weight loss, the exhaustion, the night sweats, he'd brushed them off. Now he couldn't. He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back. Okay. No questions. No protest. Just a quiet agreement. Like he knew deep down that running was no longer an option. The Wallace family's lake house was about an hour outside Atlanta, nestled beside a quiet, glassy body of water that looked black under the gray sky. It hadn't been used much since Kendra's childhood, but Monique kept it for sentimental reasons. That night, the fireplace crackled low, casting flickering light over old wooden floors and dust-covered photo frames. Kendra was already there when Trayvon arrived. She stood by the window, arms crossed, face unreadable. He walked in, hands shoved in his coat pockets. Kendra. She didn't look at him. Sit down. He hesitated, then obeyed, lowering himself into the worn leather armchair by the fire. The silence between them was thick. Then another sound, heels on hardwood. Monique entered the room, her face pale and hard. Trayvon's eyes widened. Monique? What? Why are you? We both needed to be here, she said simply. He stood up. What's going on? Kendra turned to face him. Her voice was low and steady. We know. Trayvon blinked. Know what? You infected us, she said, each word like a blade. With HIV. He took a step back. What? We're both positive, Monique said flatly. And you're the only one we've ever been with. Trayvon stared at them like they were speaking a foreign language. No, that's not possible, he said. I didn't know. I don't. He stumbled back against the wall, his face drained of color. Kendra stepped closer. Don't lie to us. Not now. Not after everything. I'm not lying, he shouted. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I've never even been tested. I didn't think I needed to. I felt fine until recently. Monique's eyes narrowed. So you just went around sleeping with people without knowing your status? It wasn't like that, Trayvon said, his voice cracking. You don't understand. Kendra's hands were shaking. You lied to me. You lied to both of us. And now we're stuck. For the rest of our lives. Trayvon's chest was heaving. I never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. The shouting echoed off the walls of the empty cabin. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Trayvon sank to the floor, his hands on his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Kendra stood over him, her voice trembling. Sorry isn't enough. And then, suddenly, she threw the file folder at him. Test results, prescriptions, discharge papers. The pages scattered across the floor like snow. He stared down at them, at the words printed in bold black ink. Positive. For the first time, the truth landed fully. Oh my God, he whispered. It's true. Monique turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. Her breath was shallow, her shoulders shaking. Kendra clenched her fists. You ruined us. You ruined everything. I didn't know, he repeated, broken now. I didn't know. I didn't know. She stepped forward, eyes burning. You should have known. What happened next took only seconds, but would haunt them forever. Trayvon stood up abruptly, too fast, too close. Kendra stepped back instinctively, bumping into the coffee table. Monique turned around just in time to see Trayvon lunge forward. Not in attack, but in desperation, arms out, pleading, maybe trying to hug, maybe just reaching out. Kendra screamed, Don't touch me. Monique reacted on instinct. She pushed him away, hard. Trayvon lost his balance, stumbled backward, and tripped over the corner of the rug near the hearth. He went down fast. Too fast. The back of his head struck the edge of the stone fireplace with a sickening crack. Everything stopped. There was no sound at first. Then Kendra let out a choked gasp. Oh my God, oh my God. Monique dropped to her knees beside Trayvon's body. His eyes were open, wide with shock. Blood seeped out slowly from the back of his head, pooling beneath him. Kendra called 911. Monique said, her voice calm but hollow. Kendra fumbled with her phone, hands trembling. There's been an accident, she told the dispatcher. He hit his head. He's not moving. Please hurry. They sat on the floor, surrounded by broken papers and shattered trust, as sirens began to wail somewhere in the distance. The paramedics arrived too late. Trayvon was pronounced dead at the scene, blunt force trauma to the skull. The medical examiner would later confirm the angle of impact matched a backward fall. No weapon, no direct blow. Just a fatal accident. Still, there were questions. Police separated the two women. Interviews were conducted. Scene photos taken. Investigators noted the tension in the room, the heated history. But in the end, neither woman was charged with murder. The district attorney ruled it involuntary manslaughter, a death caused during a confrontation, but not premeditated, not intentional. Monique was sentenced to 3 years probation with mandatory counseling. Kendra, who had never laid a hand on Trayvon and had called for help immediately, was not charged. Public opinion was divided. Some blamed the women. Others blamed Trayvon. The media spun it into a tragic triangle of betrayal and disease. Headlines screamed love, lies, and a deadly secret. But no one, not the journalists, not the public, not even the court, could fully understand what had really died that night. Not just a man, but trust, family, identity. In the weeks that followed, Monique shut down her real estate business. She stopped taking calls. She rarely left the house. Kendra dropped out of school. They didn't speak about Trayvon. Not for months. Eventually, they moved separately. Different cities, different lives, but both carrying the same weight. A single devastating truth. One man, 2 lives, and a silence that had cost them everything. The sun had barely risen when yellow tape was stretched across the entrance of the Wallace Lake house. A sheriff's deputy stood by the gate, arms folded, face unreadable. Inside, crime scene technicians moved methodically through the living room, photographing everything. The shattered coffee mug on the floor, the blood stain by the fireplace, the stack of test results now stained red at the corners. Trayvon Miller's body had already been taken away, but the questions were just beginning. Both Monique and Kendra were taken into custody that morning, not in handcuffs, but with quiet urgency. They were driven separately to the sheriff's station in Fulton County and placed in adjacent interview rooms. Neither of them said a word on the ride. Kendra went first. A young detective named Raymond Grant sat across from her, calm and methodical. The room was bare. Fluorescent lights buzzed above them. He started gently. "Tell me what happened, Kendra." Her voice trembled but never broke. She told him everything about the betrayal, the diagnosis, the lake house, the confrontation. She cried when she described watching Trayvon fall, how his head struck the stone edge with a sound she couldn't forget. "We didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "We just wanted him to understand." When asked why they hadn't simply gone to the police or confronted him in a public place, Kendra's face crumpled. "Because it was personal. Because he destroyed us, and we thought maybe he'd at least be honest with us if he saw what he'd done." In the next room, Monique sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "I pushed him," she said, "but not to hurt him. It was instinct. He lunged forward, and I reacted." Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice cold. "I didn't want him to die. God, I never wanted that." The detectives compared statements, pulled the 911 call logs, reviewed the paramedics' reports. The scene told a consistent story, a confrontation that spiraled into an accident. But there was still the question of motive. The DA's office considered pressing second-degree murder charges, arguing that Monique's history with Trayvon, combined with the anger and betrayal, could suggest intent. But the facts didn't quite hold up. The Fulton County Medical Examiner ruled Trayvon's cause of death as blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. The wound pattern matched a fall, angle backward consistent with slipping or being pushed without direct assault. There were no signs of struggle, no marks on his body, no drugs or alcohol in his system. The toxicology report confirmed something else. Trayvon was HIV positive, likely for well over a year. He hadn't known. There was no medical record of him ever being tested, no treatment history, and according to his phone records, no mention of his health to either Monique or Kendra. That finding became the hinge of the case. When news of the incident broke, the media latched onto it with grim fascination. The headlines were made for tabloid drama. Man dies in confrontation with girlfriend and her mother after infecting both with HIV. Tragic triangle, real estate agent, her daughter, and the man who betrayed them both. Fatal push or cold-blooded murder. Fulton County awaits justice. The story went viral. Some online commentators expressed outrage that Monique wasn't immediately arrested. Others sympathized with the women, calling them victims twice over. Advocacy groups debated whether Trayvon's actions, though unintentional, still constituted a form of bodily harm. It was messy, emotional, public, and in the midst of it all, two women sat at home, waiting for their fate. After 3 weeks of deliberation, the Fulton County District Attorney filed charges against Monique Wallace for involuntary manslaughter, a felony, but one that acknowledged the lack of intent. The court recognized that the death occurred during an emotionally volatile confrontation, not a premeditated act. Kendra Wallace was not charged. The courtroom was packed on the day Monique entered her plea. She stood tall, dressed in a black suit, her hands clasped in front of her. She pled guilty, not because she believed she deserved prison, but because, in her words, "I need to take responsibility for what happened, even if it wasn't what I meant to do. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and mandatory trauma counseling. She was also prohibited from contacting Trayvon's family, who had filed a civil suit seeking damages. Trayvon's mother sobbed quietly in the back of the courtroom. So did Kendra. The Wallace Lake house was sold within a month of the sentencing. Neither Monique nor Kendra ever returned. Kendra withdrew from college. She moved to Savannah, changed her phone number, and began working part-time at a bookstore while attending therapy. In time, she joined a support group for women living with chronic illness and trauma. She never spoke publicly about what happened. Monique left Atlanta altogether. She settled in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she lived quietly under the radar. Word eventually got around that she started volunteering at a nonprofit focused on women's health education. No one there knew her past. They only knew her as a quiet woman who always showed up early, took notes during training, and never said no when asked to help. Legally, the case was closed. But for Monique and Kendra, there would never be real closure. Every morning started with medication. Every new relationship came with disclosures and fear. Every reflection in the mirror reminded them of the man they once trusted and the one night that changed their lives forever. They didn't kill Trayvon out of hatred. They confronted him out of pain, and pain, left to fester, can become something dangerous, something that slips, falls, and never gets back up again. The months after the sentencing passed like a blur of seasons no one noticed. Winter came and went. Spring crept in quietly, without promise. And by the time the dogwoods bloomed across Georgia, both Monique and Kendra had disappeared from the public eye. The tabloids had moved on. The news cycle had shifted. But the consequences of that night at the lake house never left. They couldn't. Kendra Wallace was 22 when she started over. She packed 2 suitcases, left Atlanta before dawn, and took a Greyhound bus east to Savannah. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even Monique. She rented a room above a bakery in a quiet neighborhood. Her landlord, a widow named Mrs. Langston, didn't ask questions. She paid her rent in cash, got a part-time job shelving books at a local bookstore, and spent most of her days in silence. Her health was manageable. The medication made her nauseous at first, but she adjusted. What she didn't adjust to, what no pill could fix, was the shame. The invisible weight she carried every time someone looked at her like she was whole. She wasn't. Therapy helped slowly. She spoke very little in the support group at first. Just listened. Took notes. Then one night, a woman across the circle said something that finally cracked the shell Kendra had built around herself. "He didn't ruin me," the woman said. "He just reminded me of how fragile love can be when it's not honest." Kendra went home and cried for the first time in weeks. That was the beginning. Meanwhile, Monique had chosen a different kind of exile. She moved to Charlotte, North Carolina under her maiden name, Monique Hayes. She sold her car, traded her designer wardrobe for simple, quiet clothing, and got a small apartment near the east end of the city. At first, she did nothing, just sat at her kitchen table, staring at the wall. Days passed without purpose. Nights dragged longer than they should have. Guilt doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It settles in quietly, like dust on glass. One day, she walked past a women's clinic with a faded sign in the window. Volunteers needed. Health education program. She stood outside for 10 minutes before stepping in. That's where her second life began. Monique became a quiet force behind the scenes, helping organize brochures, answering phones, sitting in on training. She never told anyone who she really was. She didn't lie, but she didn't tell the whole truth either. Sometimes, after workshops, she would linger in the back of the room, watching young women laugh and learn and leave without the scars she carried. And in those moments, she felt something close to peace. They didn't speak for almost a year. Mother and daughter. Two women forever bound by one man's silence and one night's violence. Until one summer afternoon, a letter arrived at Kendra's mailbox in Savannah. It was handwritten, no return address, just her name. Inside, a single page. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope one day we can look at each other and remember who we were before all this. I still love you. I always will. Mom. Kendra read it 3 times. Then she placed it in a box under her bed, next to old photographs and a folder of medical records she still couldn't bring herself to throw away. 2 months later, she sent a reply. Maybe we can meet. Just talk. I don't know what it means yet, but I'd like to try. They met halfway at a cafe in Macon. The hug was hesitant. The conversation was cautious. But for the first time in a long time, neither of them cried. They just breathed,